I'm showing this video with the IDES seamless backdrop, which you could purchase at the link in the video description, but it would work with any seamless backdrop. It is not a video on how to create one. This is simply going to give you tips on how to use it. So what you're going to do is put the file in a folder in your library and right-click and add to workspace. This is the ZPRJ file. So if you purchased this seamless backdrop or the photo shoot scene, then it's fully editable like this. So you'll see there's two pattern pieces. They both come in frozen. This top piece is the piece that wraps around the bar. This top one, you're never going to simulate. You want to always keep this piece frozen, or else it's not gonna maintain the wrap around the bar. You can change the fabric of both of them. They're both assigned to the classic white paper, but you just want to be sure that the only one that you simulate and unfreeze is the larger pattern piece. So I'm going to do that now. I've selected my large pattern piece with transform pattern, and in 3D I'm going to right click and choose unfreeze. So the first easy edit you can make to this is just changing the texture. All you need to do is have a texture image, or in this case I have substance files, and you just drag and drop them over top of the classic white paper icon in the object browser. So this is just going to change the look of the seamless, but it's not going to change the drape, obviously. You haven't changed the physical properties of the fabric. So there's no reason to even simulate after this. So if we want to actually get some texture on this seamless and not have it look like stiff paper, we're going to change the drape. And the way that we're going to do that is go into our fabric folder and actually change the entire fabric. I'm just going to choose any fabric from the CLO fabric library, and I'm going to drag and drop it onto my fabric in the object browser. Then we're just going to simulate, but I have a few tips for you on how to do this because this seamless is so large and it can be really slow depending on your computer specs. So I'm going to turn simulation on. And you can use your hand tool to start tugging at it to get some kind of wrinkles on the floor, or, kind of some drapey gathering at the back. You can see this does move really slowly. So the tips that I have will really help you whether or not you have an NVIDIA graphics card. So the first thing you can do if you do not have an NVIDIA graphics card, this would include everyone on a Mac. You can change the particle distance to be much higher than 20. I'm trying 60 here. And things will move a bit faster. Hopefully you do have an NVIDIA graphics card, and you have the option under the simulation drop-down button for fast or GPU simulation. So if you turn this one on, things move significantly faster. This is really kind of what it's for, is to move large pattern pieces quickly, especially when they're in low res. In GPU simulation, you can put the particle distance back down to 20. And I'm just going to kind of like tug on the floor here to get a bit of interest on the seamless there, and pull a bit at the back to get some rippling and just give it all a little bit of character. I've sped this up a little bit, but I promise you with GPU simulation, it is quite fast. With the techniques for non-NVIDIA users, it will take some patience. Another fun little editing tip is using your internal polygon tool. You can draw little crease lines and select them with your transform pattern and apply a fold angle to them. Just remember anything below 180 is going to fold out, so toward our perspective, and anything above 180 will fold back away from you, just like you would for pleats and folds. This is going to just kind of make it look like there's wrinkles in the backdrop, and it's just another way to add character. You can strengthen the pattern piece to help the fold set in with Command L or Control H. And I recommend checking fold rendering on in the property editor for the fold lines. It makes them a little bit sharper. So this may be obvious, but you can also select your fabric and scroll down in the property editor and change the color, of course. Another tip I have is, let's say you want to use the texture image and normal maps of a CLO fabric like silk charmeuse here, but you want to use the drape of something else. So I can select my fabric and scroll down to the bottom of the property editor, and there's this drop-down menu that allows you to choose from any fabric in the CLO library and change just the physical drape. So if I want the silk charmeuse, but I want the drape of Ponte, something really drapey, or if I want something stiffer, then I can change that without changing the look of my fabric. So once you get the backdrop the way that you want it, if you decide you want to put it in high res to get more definition on some of these wrinkles, you can either use the high res garment button or just change the particle distance on the larger backdrop piece. If you do use the high res garment button, I suggest changing the simulation quality to normal. The fitting simulation does a thing where it all kind of hangs and stretches all the way out and then bounces back, and it's just a little bit too intense and requires too much computing power for a pattern piece this large. You're going to have to make a call based on your computer and just knowing its power. Because these pattern pieces are so large, you might decide that 5 particle distance is just too small for your computer to handle. So you might need to bring it up to 10 or 15 instead, just so that your computer will move at a reasonable speed, and it'll still give you more definition than keeping it at 20. A couple of editing tips I have: if you're using a different drape and you find that the seamless backdrop looks a bit long in the vertical part where it's kind of dragging on the floor like mine is, if you need to shorten that, the easiest thing to do is to use this fold line here that I have that is kind of the crease in it hitting the floor. And you can use your transform pattern tool to right click on that line and choose cut. Then you can make edits using your edit pattern tool. You can select either of the edges and click and drag and tap your right click to shorten it by a specific amount, or you can lengthen it if it's looking short. Then you'll need to select both of the lines again and right click and choose merge to then close the gap or put them back together if you've lengthened it. And then the length at the front end is really easy. Using edit pattern, you can just click and drag that out and extend it without really affecting the rest of the seamless. A helpful trick in this case, where I feel like I want to pull the whole thing forward from the front, is I can grab my pin box, and if you zoom in on your 2D pattern, you can double click along an edge and it will place pins all the way across that edge. Then I can click and drag that with simulation on in the 3D window and slide my whole seamless out so that I can fix this kind of angle at the back where it's angling back. Make sure if you're doing this that you've put it back in low res, or you're using GPU simulation if you have it. Now let's talk about how to combine this with your look. So you can either go to File, Save as Project, and now you can save this new seamless however you've arranged it so that you can add it to your workspace of a look that you have saved, and you can open that first. But what I'm going to do instead is have my seamless file that I'm already in, and then I'm going to go find my project file for my look, and I'm going to add that to my workspace. So I'm going to right click on the project and choose Add to Workspace. Then, assuming this is a look on an avatar, you need to make sure you have both garment and avatar checked. And remember, when you combine project files, you want to move all of the 2D patterns out of the way of your first project while they're still selected. So if you created this sort of wrinkle on the floor, you're going to need to probably simulate, because you'll have something like this where there's some collision with the wrinkle and the feet of the avatar. So before you simulate your backdrop, you should marquee over your entire look and deactivate it by right-clicking on it in 3D. It really just depends on how complicated your wrinkles are and if they're falling where the avatar is standing. So you'll see when I simulate, I'm going to try a few tricks here. The first is, because I used the high res garment button, the collision thickness on my backdrop is set to 1. So I'm going to select that and increase it to the default 2.5. So there's a little bit more of a buffer between the backdrop and the shoes. I might have used the translation option when I added my look to my workspace and placed the avatar just a little bit further back so that it didn't have some larger wrinkles to contend with. But in my case, there's just some of these taller wrinkles hitting right where the shoes are. and I really need to simulate my backdrop again in a faster way. So I'm just going to put the particle distance back up to 20 and simulate it so that it can settle down, and then I can put it back into high res. Lastly, with the backdrop, I suggest deactivating both pieces. It's best when you start to build a scene like this, even if you're not adding anything else or you're just rendering, it'll just speed up the software if you have everything deactivated. This next bit is just some extra tips if you did buy our photo shoot scene that includes these studio lights. If you select the white part of the light, you'll notice that the way that it comes is set to light, which just means that that white portion of the OBJ will output some light, and you can adjust this slightly. So while that part is selected, you can see there's some editing options in the property editor, primarily the intensity, as well as some color settings below. I'm not going to get too far into these because I have a better suggestion for you in terms of getting light out of these. I don't think that the material setting for light is as effective as actual lighting. So what I suggest is that you add a rectangle light to your scene by clicking on this button in the top right hand corner. When you add a light, it always ends up on the floor at 0, 0, 0, and it's pointing down. So you're going to use your gizmo to arrange it to be where the light is. This black dotted line that's aiming out is showing you the direction the light is pointing, so use that as a guide for how you want to aim it at your avatar. These studio lights do aim quite far down, so I suggest not matching the angle of the light exactly, otherwise your lighting is going to be a little bit too low. So you can cheat it a bit. You're not going to see this light in the end when you render. So make sure that you aim it how you want it on your scene and don't try to copy the angle of the studio lights exactly. In the property editor, you can adjust the width and height of the rectangle light, and I just eyeball it to get it as close as possible to the size of the white part of the light. But again, we're going to hide this once we render, so it's not important that it's the exact size. Once you're happy with the size and placement, you can uncheck this show box in the property editor, and that will hide the light. Before adjusting any other settings, I suggest you add another rectangle light and do the same on the other side. Then we'll go up here to this light bulb icon, which are your lighting settings. And I suggest that you maybe start by deactivating the dome light, which is kind of like the light in your room. The environment light is going to create sort of an overall room lighting that makes the studio lighting less intense. Just imagine you're doing an actual photo shoot and you've set up all of these lights. You probably would flick off the overhead lighting in the room so that your lights are the sole lighting. Now we can see just what our lights are doing. So if I scroll down to the bottom of the lighting properties, I'll see the light that I've added here. I know it's the one I've added because it's checked on as activate. So you can change the intensity. And if you need to adjust the placement or angle, you can check this show box on and you can readjust that with your gizmo. So I can see that mine is still angling a little too far down because I mimicked the angle of the studio light a bit too much. You can uncheck show to see what it's going to look like in the render and do this as many times as you need. So you can see here, my light is all coming from the one light because I didn't add a rectangle to the other studio light. So this gives you an idea of what it looks like with this much intensity, and you can adjust it as needed or add more lighting. Don't forget too, you can move these OBJs around however you want. So I'm going to hit my 5 key to look from above, and I'll just slide this other light back and arrange it with my gizmo. Just note that if you're using the rectangle lights as your actual lighting, you'll need to adjust them both. The OBJ just gives you the visual of a light, and the rectangle is actually producing the light.